Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Navigating Carbon, your compass to carbon management. As always, I'm your host, Deb Ryan. And in this week's episode, I sat down with Jim Crompton. Jim has had an illustrious career in the oil and gas industry and most recently has been involved at both Colorado School of Mines and also through USC through the Future Energy podcast. Jim and I really dive into and talk about some of the lessons learned that they've had from the Future of Energy's podcast and talk about things like how do we think about local development as it relates to oil and gas? How do we think about things like energy poverty and energy access to energy? And we also talk about how do we find common language? How do we actually have conversations around what sustainable development means and really break down things like, are we even asking the right questions to try and find some of that common ground? If you like the episode, please make sure you subscribe. But for now, make sure you sit back and enjoy my conversation with Jim. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of the Navigating Carbon podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined by Mr. Jim Crompton. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing very good. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, you and I had a chance to chat in person a couple of weeks ago to talk about everything that was going on, and I'm excited to dive in as well. Just for folks, I've known you a long time, and I'm thrilled that you're on. But for folks that don't know who you are, give us just a little bit of a background of Mr. Jim.
Well, Mr. Jim, graduate from Colorado School of Mines, logo promote there. No, is in geophysics. I got a bachelor's and master's in geophysics. Went to work for the oil company, Chevron. Stayed there for 37 years. I said one of the amazing things you can do with a large integrated company is you can have a whole bunch of careers in one paycheck. And instead of a lot of people who have one career and a whole bunch of paychecks, I was the opposite. So I stayed there for a while. Maybe one of the more interesting things I did there was working on the digital oil field, kind of initiatives, along with Mike Hauser and a bunch of people in some other companies. And that's where I kind of got linked in with Society of Petroleum Engineers, several different of their technical study groups. Used to be the digital oil field. Now it's data science and engineering analytics, DSATs. I keep not getting the acronym wrong every once
So
in a while,
many
but also
acronyms.
sustainable development and different things. Amazingly, from that, they honored me last year at their annual meeting with a Distinguished Member Award, even though I'm not a petroleum engineer. So that's kind of a quirk of history. After I retired from Chevron, moved from Houston back to my home here in Colorado, I was invited to put together a course and teach it at the Colorado School of Mines at the Petroleum Engineering Department. Um, the infamous and every the legend of the industry, Ramona Graves, cornered me at a meeting one time. I was there and said, "Jim, we need you to teach this course." And no one ever says no to Ramona, so that was a have to do. But after putting the course together and teaching it for 5 years, including the horrible 2 COVID years when you had to do all this virtually. I retired again, handed over the course to a much smarter, much better uh, programmer professor, and have been just poking around doing odd jobs. Some of it for the Payne Institute for Public Policy on campus, doing some policy research and methane emissions on upstream oil and gas. And now I'm poking my nose into orphan wells. I'm fortunate enough to be able to kind of go where my curiosity leads right now.
I love that. And it's there's lots of stuff in there that we're going to unpack around emissions and methane emissions and orphan wells and stuff like that. But one of the things that you've also done is that you host a podcast called The Future of Energy. So tell us about that. Where you're at with that and a little bit of background on that.
Well, we just finished season 3, 45 episodes. I'm just under about 10,000 download viewers through
Amazing.
the 3 years. So that's all the responsibility of another university connection I have with the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And I've known several of the professors there for a long time. Chevron had a joint, um, kind of investment program with them back on the digital oil field. They called it CSOF, for Smart Interactive Oil Field Technology. So everybody has to have an acronym for something,
Yeah,
right?
right. It's ridiculous.
So I knew them, and about 2 years ago, I got a call from the head of the petroleum engineering department, Dr. Raj Ashagi, who's almost as legendary as Dr. Ramona Graves in the industry. And he said, Jim, we need you to run a podcast series for us because we just got some money from a graduate of mine that did well, and it set up a Urshagi Center for Energy Transition, ESET. And he said, we're doing a bunch of things, we're sponsoring research, but we wanted to have a educational outreach. Someone said we need to do this podcast. Well, I'm about the only person on the planet that's more qualified than Dr. Shaggy is to do a podcast, much less than you with regard to it. So, but I said yes again. I have this bad habit of keep saying yes, and I gave it a shot, and we ended up with a little bit different format than you have. I had a couple of USC students who would do the interviewing. I would kind of set up the script and the theme and do a lot of the inviting behind the scenes for the different speakers. And we decided to cover, like you, a lot of different topics, quite diverse, and but have it as an interaction between the students and the expert, so that we kind of got this cross generational thing going, because the whole part of it was educating the next generation on these many, many different themes of scale and complexity of the energy environment. So we've done that. We've had some just tremendously interesting conversations from a utilities perspective, from transportation perspective, oil and gas, future of oil and gas perspective, environmental modeling. We talked to a former Nobel Prize winner who was involved in the thing with they gave it for the setting up of the United Nations Climate Framework Foundation, who's a former Chevron fellow. Chris Wright, new Secretary of Energy, has been on. I stole one of your friends, Schuler, for one of my podcasts on is oil a blessing or a curse? She was fantastic.
That's a great topic for Tisha. Yeah.
Part of a panel that we had with regard to the different things along with the former CEO of Berry Petroleum, California oil company.
Yeah.
Um, so I had a lot of fun with that. I mean, it was challenging, as you know, the amount of work you have to do behind the scenes is an awful lot in order to try to get a good a good broadcast that's of interesting. I tended, as a lot of old university professors did, to go a lot longer than I should have. So my podcasts were about an hour long. We worked hard to keep it to less than an hour. So I'm impressed that you're doing half that, which of course makes it easier to listen to. So, I think you got the right direction. But we even had Dr. Scott Tinker from University of
Oh,
Texas
fun.
and Switch Energy. We got him on as a panel one time, and I got a chance to meet him. Dr. Stephen Koonin from the book Unsettled. A lot of smart, cool people.
Yeah, really interesting, diverse mix of speakers and topics and stuff that you guys have covered on that. And I love, and it lends itself to the name of it with just the future of energy, right? The fact that it is very much student led and looking at that sort of like next generation of energy, not just oil and gas, but all energy, right? Like it's awesome. So like from all of these different guests and all of these different interviews and all of the episodes that you guys have done, one of the things I want to dive into today is like some of the lessons learned that you've had through all these conversations and some of that kind of stuff. And I want to start with something you and I've talked about quite a bit, but like as it relates to energy transition and the future of energy, like are we even asking the right question? Like, where do we even start?
Well, I mean, that's a fascinating kind of topic, and it's something that over the last couple of years, through my work, I think I've kind of figured out the answer is no, we're not asking the right questions, and a lot of people told me that. And we started out, we actually for the first year we called our thing energy transition talks, and then we kind of hit the subject: is there such a thing as an energy transition? We're adding a lot of renewable intermittent energy sources. There's no doubt about that, and there's yes, climate change is real, and yes, it's caused by human activity through burning of fossil fuels. All of that is given. But is there such a thing as an energy transition? I mean, one guy pointed out that the only real successful energy transition we've ever had completely is when we went off of whale oil and for kerosene with regard to that. So the whales appreciated that that was a successful energy transition. But all the rest of it's pretty much been additive. We keep adding energy sources to our mix because it is the scale is important. And again, it kind of I love your Venn diagrams where the two sides don't connect. I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean,
Yeah, I
I've I've
appreciate that.
I've been thinking about that, and again, kind of reflecting from one of the lessons learned from many of the speakers is that today, we one of our big problems in communication, particularly communication to the next generation STEM students, is that we don't have a common ground. We don't have a common language. We are talking past each other. And and that search for something where we could agree on maybe the even what the question is, and then get into our different opinions about arguing about solutions. I mean, there's this. I was an old politician, I think, in the U.S. in the '60s or '70s, said, you're allowed your own interpretation, but you're not allowed your own data. Well, we've broken that rule because now we have our own opinions and we go find data that supports that. And then we go back into the public domain and throw mud at each other. Right. So it's not helpful. It's not
It's it
accomplishing anything.
it's not, and it is something, what Jim's referring to. I talk about the Venn diagram in the way, and again, I'm an engineer at heart, so I love these kinds of things. But like we've got industry in one circle, and we've got like clean tech and all the startups and stuff who are trying to create data solutions and physical solutions and tech solutions and who are trying to scale. And then we've got the nonprofit kind of sector, which includes sort of regulators and the big carbon registries and folks like the EDF and the UN and things like that. And we haven't figured out how to overlap this Venn diagram. And that's very much at the heart of what I know, Jim, you've been really looking at and been really passionate about, and that I'm very vocal and passionate about as well. So, like, if we're not asking the right questions, like, what do you think that should be the number one thing that we should focus on, or that where we should start and find that overlap?
Well, I'm going to give you two examples. And one I think is a little bit lower level, though, then I'm going to go all the way up to the atmosphere and ask what I think, do the framing that I think is really important. A recent SBE webinar, it was uh, Dr. Mokati from SLB was talking about this same problem. What is a common language that we can talk about different things? And he called one of your bubbles the pro environmental activism, and he called another one of your bubbles the industry pro growth ones. And he said the common language there is methane emissions, because methane emissions is obviously a greenhouse gas accelerator warmer, so it's the climate people are interested in that. But then the industry people should be interested in that because it's a waste stream. If they captured it, they could sell it, right? So it should be something that both sides would be interested in addressing. And that's right. I mean, he agreed. He gave a very good, kind of webinar about how those issues should be your common ground that you've talked about in some of your kind of podcasts here. But I found a better way, I think, for me and for others. And again, it's not my idea. It's just others have pointed it out and I've learned it. is that the top question that we should ask first with all of this is the question of bettering human lives. And of course, that phrase comes from Chris Wright in Liberty Energy's, nonprofit foundation, where they're trying to get more propane into sub-Saharan Africa in order to reduce the terrible medical conditions about breathing burned biomass and dung in a confined space for cooking your dinners. But if you look at bettering human lives, and of course the UN speak, it's called sustainable development, and they've got their 12, I think it's 12 goals with regard to other things. So they've been talking about these things for decades, right? It's not new, but it's a challenge we've made progress on, made a lot of progress on, but in other areas we're still a real gap between that. So if we start out with bettering human lives, the next level of this discussion, this pyramid, if we get to that, my Maslow's theory of hierarchy here, is water brings life, energy brings wealth. And with that, well, we can't throw water out of this equation. We can talk a lot about energy, and we do, and we're engineers and geoscientists and all the rest of that, so we talk a lot about energy. But don't forget water. I mean, water, is needed. We got this huge problem in the Colorado River Basin in California about not enough water. And back when they started the compact, they overestimated how much water was available. And they've been struggling with that poor assumption ever since. But something like 85% of the water in the Colorado River goes to agriculture. It doesn't go to swimming pools in Los Angeles and rich people's homes. It goes into a lot of the farmers' land, so that we have something to eat and our cattle have something to eat, right? So, well, you don't forget water. I mean, I guess that's the next light bulb that went on for me, is that's important as well. And we actually had a couple of speakers, USC professors, that were talking about water. So that was a
Yeah.
good ad. And then
Well, and
the
oh,
next
you keep
question
going.
is that, can we get green without getting rich? And I don't mean Elon Musk rich. I mean richer, with regard to some of the societies, and some of the analysis says we need to get we need to deal with these sustainable development goals first, because of the tremendous wealth inequity, energy inequity that we have on the planet. We have 1 billion lucky people, and we have about 7 billion unlucky people with regard to energy distribution. So that idea of just transition became an important theme in our podcast as well.
There's so much to unpack in all of that. I love it. So the idea of the water piece, I completely agree with. And there's actually a great book on the water rights of the Colorado River. I can find a link to it. And for people that are interested, talks about the history of, I can't remember where the river flows or something like that. I'll find it. It's a phenomenal book if you haven't read it. Fascinating problem. And we're starting to see the idea of like water credits and like sort of like a carbon market-esque kind of water market developing and stuff like that. So it's definitely getting a lot more attention. I want to go back to something you just talked about though, in terms of the inequities and like a just transition piece around sustainable development. Because I think we're very good at trying to solve problems. We're engineers, we're all, we're geoscientists, we're trying to research and develop things and stuff like that. The challenge is that everything's different, right? Like here in Colorado, it's really sunny. Like in other parts of the US, it's not. I actually have property and split my time between here and Hawaii. And that provides a whole different challenge here in the US around energy security for islands and island nations and stuff like that. You talked about, cooking in Africa and it's not all parts of Africa either. And so like how do you kind of think about, when we think about the idea that energy lifts people out of poverty, that energy brings wealth and allows people to develop and stuff like that? Like, how do you think we start breaking down this idea of like not this one size fits all sort of problem? Like,
I mean, that's the key. It's not one size fits all. The climate challenge, the energy challenge, looks a lot different if you're sitting in Gothenburg, Sweden, if you are in Nairobi, Kenya, or many other, almost any other place on the world. Your property in Hawaii versus, the Rocky Mountains or whatever it is. And you can't be arrogant enough. I mean, there a lot of speakers said, well, we have to approach this with a great deal of humility, not thinking we're so smarter than everybody else, so we're going to tell them what the answer is. That, and by the way, I use Gothenburg, Sweden because of Miss Thunberg and all of her efforts, in Europe and about the energy, the climate issues. But it's and all of these different places are right. They're just differently right because their situation is different. We are good engineers. We love solving problems. But if we aren't working on the same problem, we're not going to get to the same place, right? So it divides us as well. Um, One of the Dr. Don Paul, who is a friend of mine at USC, and he was one of our very first people we interviewed, and he talked about the scale and the complexity of the energy system is unique. It is huge. It can't be one thing, right? With regard to that, is energy transition moving from coal to natural gas in the United States? Well, that cut a lot of CO2 emissions from our advanced society. Is the energy transition a move from biomass and dung and trees to propane in Kenya? And maybe yes, right? And or is it a movement away from coal in South Africa or Indonesia or in Eastern India or whatever it is? I mean, all of these things are transitions of sorts because, and I guess that's the other aha lesson learned from all of this stuff is for the last time, for the first time in about 20, 30 years, the energy demand in the world is now growing faster. It used to be 1% or something. And, we just kind of, the utilities just kind of looked at it as flat, as a plateau. And then, so they could think of transferring this amount of load base from a retired coal-fired power plant to a whole bunch of wind and solar farms with regard to that stuff. But now, if it's growing 2% or 4%, because of AI data centers and because of electrification of transportation, because of moving people out of poverty and that other 7 billion, people in the world that really matter. Is it worry about how we've essentially outsourced manufacturing to China, and now we blame China for all the emissions that we used to have, but now we just put out of sight, out of mind, kinds of things around that I mean, one, it's hard to have a global perspective when it's so complicated and it's so big. And, but two, we have to solve these problems locally with the local resource that we have with regard to that. And if it's natural gas, then it's natural gas. If it's propane, if it's propane. If it's more wind or offshore wind or solar, then that's what you want to try to, work with. The all of the above would be a great common ground for your discussion, except we tend to, and this is another, I had a whole bunch of lessons learned here, but one of them is
What?
that words are powerful. And when we say good energy, and that means there's bad energy, right? And of course, that's fossil fuels, and we're evil, and we can't. We're all of a sudden, no one listens to that side of the argument. Yet, as your friend Trish, talked about, it's our energy, it's our industry that probably has a capability and skill set to solve more of these problems better than many other industries do. So don't shut us out of the discussion.
Yeah.
Of course,
Again,
others think oil companies are evil, so don't listen to them. They're gonna just want to produce more oil and gas all the time. But you could decarbonize and increase production. That's what methane capture is all about. That's what carbon sequestration is all about. So, this whole idea of, and this is a fascinating exercise I did, and with some of the newer unconventional um, producing pads in Colorado, just in just up the road from you in Greeley, Colorado. Well, essentially, they took a look at their producing pad, and they designed emissions out. They took care of the high bleed pneumatics. They took care of the flares. They electrified their producing equipment. They essentially they didn't get to a 10 or 15% incremental decline in their methane emissions. They got to 85%.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And they just reimagined that. This is a word I got from Dr. Bea Spiller from the Resources of the Future. And she was talking about transportation. And she first kind of used this word that I heard. We have to reimagine the problem. And that reimagining, I think, starts with bettering human lives. And then it starts at looking whatever energy resources you have locally or can get your hands on to improve the condition of life. And with that condition of life, all of a sudden another light bulb comes on, and all of a sudden it's become more you lower your environmental impact. You do it. It's an and problem. It's not an or problem. And we have focused so much on an or problem, or I'm right and you're wrong kind of problem, instead of an and problem that I think we can get to. But it takes reimagining what we're talking.
This I'm just going to jump in because to be honest, there's so much to unpack again in what you've talked about and things like that. Like you talked about how words are so powerful.
I'm like one of those
And
Russian nested dolls, right? You take away one and there's
and
another
then the
one,
next
and
little
there's
bit, and
another
then
one,
the
there's
next. I
another
love
one.
it. So like you talked about how powerful words are in this. And I think it is where I think we do talk past each other and stuff like that. And again, we've talked about Tisha Schuler a lot here, but she put an article out on Substack last week. I think it was last week, and I can link to it for everybody that I really resonated with, where she talked about the fact that we shouldn't be talking about an all of the above. We should be talking about a best of the above, because it's exactly to what you're talking about then, where this is local solutions for local problems in that regard to solve a global problem that we're all trying to figure out, but it has to be done locally. And so, and you sort of alluded to this before as well, but like, what is the best solution in different parts of the world and in different cities and even in different states around the US? We don't have this sort of one size fits all energy solution. We are using all forms of energy around the US, and it does vary pretty significantly. And I was actually pulling apart some Canadian energy data last week for something else I'm working on. And the Canadian energy mix is actually fascinating, where you would expect in Alberta, like the use of natural gas and fossil fuels for their electricity grid is really high. But in other parts, even in BC, that's only one state over and still has quite a lot of fossil fuel development, most of their utility is coming from hydro. And then in Toronto, it's nuclear and things like that. They've got this wildly diverse energy mix that is, again, best use in those locations. You can't have hydro everywhere. That's not going to work. You can't have geothermal everywhere. It's not going to work. Like it's, like it's a fascinating kind of piece to me. And it goes back to that piece that you talked about with language of like, how do we describe that? How do we talk about that? And then how do we also not then point fingers when people are doing things differently? Like if like it's such an important conversation. So I don't know if there was anything else in that you wanted to like pick up on and stuff, but I just kind of wanted to tie a number of those pieces together because you hit on so many important pieces of the conversation. I think it's amazing.
One time I had probably had a teacher back in elementary school. So when I'm pointing my finger at you, I'm pointing about 3 fingers back at me, right? So really the responsibilities, again, it's a local and problem. And I think you kind of get to the issue of, when you get to the local issues, you also get to the economic issues. And you've talked about, the market has a voice. And I think in these two bubbles that are not talking to each other, one of them is looking at the world from a cost benefit sort of perspective. And is that they'll make any reduction in greenhouse gas emissions if there's a market driver. If I can recover more natural gas for sales, there's a market driver. And I could probably cure 2/3, 3/4 of my methane emissions problems by things that make me more money in terms of the profits. But and again, where there's hydro, it's huge. It's fantastic. It lowers your cost of energy in Norway or wherever it is, to the point where you can see energy in a totally different way. Tennessee Valley Authority in the southeast part of the U.S. has electricity rates that are lower than any place else. They're half that of California with regard. But again, it's because of what they're blessed with in terms of that. But, if you are one of the maybe more extreme climate advocates, it's not a cost benefit because it's such an existential threat. You can't put cost on the life of the planet, right? So it's a risk management challenge. And I have to manage these huge risks, and cost doesn't matter. And, even now, some of those perspectives, you can read papers from the University of Oxford in England, which are again saying the capitalist system isn't going to work in this scenario. It doesn't help us because it tries to value things, and just in financial terms, in short-term financial terms. So that let's get rid of capitalism. Let's get rid of growth. Let's get rid of, and maybe I've got too much stuff, and I can live with less stuff. So I can think about a degrowth scenario for my lifestyle. But if you're starving, and then you're that other 7 billion, and you're going to deny growth to them, I mean, that's immoral. I mean, so you can't, you have to look at it locally, and and yes, the market's got a voice, the community's got a voice, even natural, native, indigenous cultures and stuff have a voice. One of the things I've gotten into, this is kind of my last lesson learned, is that we began to, right now we look at where are we going to get critical minerals from in the United States, because everybody wants all these minerals that, even some of them as simple as copper, and as kind of strange as rare earths. But most of those are going to be in the Western United States. Most of those are going to be within 30 miles of a Native American community. And we've not done very well in including their voice, which is very different. Again, the idea of humility, the idea of listen first instead of talk first. To understand where everybody is at the table. And there's a group at Payne Institute called the Native American Mining and Mineral Sovereignty, NAMES. And it's really trying to bring in the Native American communities. We interviewed my favorite episode is interviewing two young Native American graduate students from School of Mines who went into electrical engineering, went into geophysics, and their perspective on things. And they're trying to balance their native culture with their engineering knowledge, their STEM knowledge with regard to these things. And there's this one quote that will always stick with me till the day I die. It says that for our mineral resources, we didn't inherit them from our forefathers. We borrowed them from our future grandchildren. And with that, that's reimagining how we move forward to the future of energy.
Yeah, that is a really powerful quote, because it's something that I've in one of the previous podcasts I did was with Daniel Ramey from Resources for the Future, and he was talking about some of the research he's done with some of the Native American tribes, particularly the Southern Utes. And again, this philosophy of, how do we balance both prosperity for the tribe and for our community with, looking after, the land that we own and the land that we care about for the future as well. It's a really, again, finding that balance and being able to find the right words around that is a really powerful. And I love that quote. It's amazing. So, Jim, I
And
wanted to say, I mean, this has been amazing.
names for a couple of summits were in Ignacio, Colorado, on the Southern Ute
Okay.
Reservation.
Oh, very cool. Um, uh, that happened fairly recently, didn't it? That was a summit that the Payne Institute
Where
held. Um,
they've had, though, two in the last 2 summers. Yes, very recently.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So it's really cool to see that the evolution of how even we, work with the tribes and develop and again work as part of community with our local neighbors and the local communities and stuff. So I mean, Jim, this has been amazing. So many lessons learned from what you guys have been doing with the Future of Energy podcast and just with your work with Pain Institute and your career. Any final takeaways and stuff that we haven't covered before we say goodbye?
Well, I think there's two of the hardest things that we can do as human beings is, first of all, we have to shut up and listen to the other person and not just be thinking about what I'm going to say to counter your last argument when instead of listening to you, we have to listen. And then we have to approach this with humility. I mean, um, we have to think about the other voices that are either very silent or not at the table. And we have to, and that makes it complicated because they aren't always going to agree with me. And to learn something from someone who's disagreeing with me constructively. I mean, if we could stop yelling at each other, if we could stop calling each other names, if we could just say that we're trying to better human lives, then I think this is doable. There's a lot of common ground, but we emphasize through the power of words clean energy versus that means there got to be dirty energy. And, there's all these words that we use to push the other person back in the corner instead of listening to them. So listening and humility, those would be the hardest two things we could have to do.
Yeah. I think on that, I think it's a really good place for us to stop for now, at least. This was a great conversation. And thank you so much for coming on and joining me and sharing what you've learned as you've been continuing down this journey as well.
What damn it. Well, certainly appreciate the invitation. You're my very favorite podcaster. You're second only to Scott Tinker on his PBS Energy Switch series. So I've really
Well,
enjoyed the opportunity.
thank you.